Welcome back. Breaking news this morning. Hezbollah and Iran launching a coordinated strike on Israel as this conflict is escalating. Strikes are also widening across the Middle East, hitting Qatar and Iraq. Fox News correspondent Steve Harrigan is live right now on the Armenian-Iranian border with the very latest on the ground. Steve.
Maria, the U.S. Central Command announcing that it has destroyed 16 mine-laying ships from Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. That's, of course, the waterway through which about one-fifth of the world's oil passes through. President Trump issued a stern warning, saying that if mines had been placed in the strait and they are not removed immediately, Iran could face consequences at a level never seen before. Central Command saying they've already destroyed 50 ships in Iran's Navy, basically rendering that Navy combat ineffective. A real stark warning, too, about potential internal dissent inside Iran. Iran's police chief saying that any protesters on the street will be treated like enemies of the state and that security forces have their fingers on the triggers. Maria, back to you.
All right, Steve, please stay safe. Right in the middle of Iran and Armenia, where you are is incredible. Thank you, Steve Harrigan, for this work you are doing this morning. We are still waiting on details of the Pentagon's ask, Meemaw, for that defense supplemental package we've been talking about. I've been reporting it's around $50 billion that the Pentagon is going to be asking for, and it has already used, the Pentagon, over $5.5 billion worth of munitions on this war in just the first 2 days of Operation Epic Fury. Joining me now is Wisconsin Congressman Derrick Van Orden. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. You were a Navy SEAL for 26 years. Thank you for your service to this great nation. You've been on the ground in every single country Iran has attacked. How do you see this war this morning?
Well, the President, the Secretary of War, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have been very clear that they're ahead of schedule. So you lay out a plan, and unlike some of my Democrat colleagues, unlike what they've been saying, this isn't just a pickup game. So there's a strategic plan that was developed a while ago, and we're on track and actually ahead of schedule right now to destroy Iran's nuclear capability, their ballistic missile capability, their Navy, which is you're seeing right now in near real time to make sure they can't affect oil transit through the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. And
we're making sure that they do not project power throughout the region.
So what is your assessment of the Strait of Hormuz? Obviously, it's having major effects on this market with oil prices trading higher. And Iran seems to be bullying any foreign ships to come through so that it can transport its own oil through the strait and stop others.
Well, if people can't see that Iran cannot be trusted by this point, I'm not sure what it's going to take. They've attacked over a dozen countries, and they're holding the world's oil supply, 20% of it, hostage. I do want to be clear about the oil markets right now. Less than 5% of the United States imported oil goes through the Straits of Hormuz. So the guys that are jacking up these prices right now need to be very, very careful, because there's a difference between profiting and profiteering. And if they're taking advantage of this to raise oil prices in an unwarranted manner, they need to really check themselves.
So what does that mean from your standpoint in Congress in terms of investigating this and bringing those people to account?
What it means is we have to understand that people need to have some level of acceptable risk. And if the United States Navy needs to help get this oil through the Straits of Hormuz, then that's what we need to get to.
Yeah.
But we have to make sure that people are not taking advantage of this wartime situation for profit purposes.
Yeah, of course. And what about the stockpiles of weapons? Have you heard from the Pentagon yet in an official capacity asking for money in a defense supplemental? What are you expecting there?
Well, we're still in talks with the Pentagon, and it's very important that we work hand in glove with them. I mean, we are the authorizing folks, and we write the checks. We understand that there will be a supplemental coming through. How that looks specifically, I'm not going to discuss, as we're still in negotiations. But the American warfighter and the American warfighter's family needs to know this. Congress will provide every single thing that they need to prosecute this war in the most effective manner.
Does $50 billion sound right to you?
It's in the ballpark. It really depends on what type of munitions we're talking about. If you're talking about conventional weapons, they're not as expensive as some of the exquisite ones that they use during Midnight Hammer, for instance.
Yeah, like a Tomahawk is costing what, $2.2 million just for one?
That's correct. And, we've been doing defense acquisition stuff on the House Armed Services Committee, which I'm a member of, for several months now. So we really have a very, very good understanding of our defense production capability and the capability of our allies. And we're working together with them.
Yeah, of course. And the president said that he was moving to lower-priced weapons now that they've degraded Iran so much. They didn't need to use the higher levels of weaponry. And I spoke with Colonel Joel Rayburn on Sunday, and he added to all of that. Here's what he told me. Watch.
In terms of the ordnance, munitions that the Air Force and the Israeli Air Force are able to deploy against Iranian targets in the interior of Iran's territory right now, it's great to see those B-52s, those B-1s, the manned aircraft be able to go over those targets, because that means we're past the phase where there's an air defense threat that forces our people to hang back and have to use standoff munitions, especially the Tomahawk missiles, which are a very precious and scarce commodity. So they're able to drop bigger payloads. But we still need to do the right thing, and I think President Trump and Deputy Secretary of War Steve Feinberg are making all the right moves to try to ramp up that production so that we can replenish those very scarce munitions quickly, because that's a vital strategic deterrent against, for example, China, if it ever comes to that.
Yeah, Congressman, we've been talking about the impact on China as well here, which is super important. But let me get your take on what else is happening in the middle of all of this. The president is reportedly writing an executive order which would remove Anthropic and its AI technology from all executive branch agencies, possibly as soon as this week. This fight is deepening. Anthropic has sued the Trump administration as well as Secretary of War Pete Hegseth after the Pentagon's decision to label the company a supply chain risk. Congressman, your reaction?
Well, I don't know if you saw the other day, we had the 7 largest AI companies and several members of Congress and the President of the United States and some of our workers talking about the power supply for AI. And this decision with Anthropic, we need to understand that all of these companies must serve the American people first. And if they're not going to do that, and if they're going to be a supply chain risk, meaning that they can't serve the American public because they're not going to be around, then they don't belong in our supply chain.
And I don't know how you're going to get your colleagues on the left to get on board with all of this when they won't even open the Department of Homeland Security, Congressman. And we're in the middle of this war, and DHS is still shut down 26 days. You know
what? It's shameful. 50-plus Democrats voted this time to not declare Iran a sponsor of terrorism. Over 150 Democrats voted to not deport criminal illegal aliens convicted of raping and murdering American citizens. I can't square that circle. But the Democrat Party needs to get on board. They need to understand it's not about them. It's not about their individual political careers. It's not about, fighting for fighting's purpose. It's about making sure that we work collectively as Democrats and Republicans during a time of crisis to make sure that we forward the best interests of the United States. It's simply not that complicated when you put your ego aside.
Mm-hmm. I don't understand what's behind that. Do you? Why would they not want to deem Iran a sponsor of terrorism when we know this for sure, given its support of groups like Hamas and Hezbollah?
If President Trump said oxygen was good, you'd have a bunch of Democrats running around with plastic bags on their head. That's exactly why they're doing this. They're doing it because they dislike President Trump. The Trump derangement syndrome is real. Donald Trump is ending a war that the Iranians declared on us 47 years ago. President Trump doesn't think in the short term, what's the next election look like? President Trump thinks about the next generation. And we're cleaning up a mess that several previous administrations left us. And it's time. You spent a tremendous amount of your time discussing the issues with oil. Why? Because the Iranians have been mucking about with the Straits of Hormuz for decades. Yeah. Remember the USS Stark? That was a naval vessel that was blown up by the Iranians. Why? Because they're trying to make sure that we could get oil through the Straits of Hormuz. The time for this is over. The time for the Iranian mullahs to dictate to the world economic policies and counterterrorism policies is over.
Yeah.
It's just that.
All really important points. We appreciate your leadership, sir. Thank you. Congressman Derrick Van Orden.
Well, you're welcome.
All right. We will talk soon. Thank you, sir. We'll be right back.